David, if we just park those nuances for a second and talk just more generally, do you support this whole kind of emergency siren?
No, it's terrible. It's ridiculous. It's such an intrusion into people's everyday life. And it's going to happen on a Sunday afternoon when a lot of people are going to be relaxing with their families. It's also going to be St George's Day, which is England's national day, of course. It's going to ruin that day for our country as well, you know, if you're from England too.
Well, absolutely. How can you say with a straight face that an alarm for 10 seconds on a phone is going to ruin England's national day?
Well, because it's like an intrusion. It's just really Orwellian. It's like imposing a new system on us, and you don't know where this is going. We've had the last 3 years of lockdowns and all this kind of coercion and fear-mongering and the campaigns we've seen, and people are, like, very disturbed by that. I think this is just another example of the government doing something which is going to increase the level of fear in the general population, and another intrusion of the government into our personal lives and everyday lives. Like them sending an alarm and a siren to our phone. And a lot of people aren't going to be expecting it, and they could be quite scared by it.
But maybe they're just trying to keep you safe.
I don't think so. I mean, this particular one is just a test, isn't it? But why not have, you know, we've got sirens that we had in the Second World War, but there's not been a single test of them in the last 80 years. Why suddenly now is the government trying to do this in our own mobile phone devices? This is really intrusive and quite Orwellian and frightening, and it shouldn't be done. I think this is something the government should just stay out of it and keep off our phones.
No offence sitting there for David. What do you make to it?
I think it's a very good idea. I think the idea of a national alert where, if God forbid, an emergency, a more virulent version of the pandemic strikes, there is a means of contacting everyone.
So give me an example then of what you would think is the kind of emergency that would warrant pushing in an immediate alert to everyone's phone.
A nuclear bomb going off. This one. I'm a child of the 80s. Basically,
that's
the thing. People know about that.
If a bomb goes off and I get a message on my phone telling me what, go in your living room, Michelle, there's been a nuclear bomb.
To be honest, my flippant suggestion aside, there'll be a hierarchy of different scenarios where alerts would be triggered. I think
give me one then.
Well, okay. So whether there is if there's a sufficiently virulent terrorist attack using some form of biological weapon, if there is a more virulent version, a more contagious version of the pandemic, the point is it is useful to have an alert system that we can be contacted. And if we're going to have one, it should be tested. And if it's going to be tested, because IT always needs testing, better to test it in the middle of the day and actually make sure everyone knows about it than, for example, at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday when people really will be petrified.
Is there a part of you, because actually when I press pause and look back on the last few years with the COVID thing, the amount of kind of basic civil liberties that we had removed from us under the guise of this pandemic, people actually now, it's the norm, or it was some people's norm. Some people actually would still like it to happen, that we're told we can't leave the house. You can only step foot outside your doorstep for 30 minutes a day or whatever it is. To me, that is a massive overreach of the state's power. Is there not a small part of you that actually worries that so many people in charge got a little bit full of their own importance during COVID? They quite like this notion of being able to control people, and this is just an extension of that.
I think my view on things like lockdown, if we'd have locked down 2 weeks earlier, tens of thousands of people wouldn't have had to die. If we'd have had the circuit breaker on time, tens of thousands more people wouldn't have had to die. We've had nearly 200,000 people die in this country, and the evidence, the independent evidence on lockdown, is that it was effective. Now, not every decision was right. Some of the decisions, certainly some of the way the policing happened, where those poor ladies who were walking in Derbyshire got nicked for having a cup of coffee, that's mad, completely mad, and certainly mad given how the laws were enforced and delivered to us, given there were parties happening in Downing Street. But
Oh, I'm itching to respond on this lockdown, but let me let you respond.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly isn't true. I mean, in the first year of the lockdown, there were not 200,000 excess deaths. I mean, there was 10 or 20,000 excess deaths, and the flu disappeared in the statistics. So a lot of what was diagnosed as COVID was actually just a flu. There has been some excess deaths since the rollout of the experimental injections, but that's another story. But what
the
this is...
vaccines, to give them their correct name.
Well, that's what I call them. But this is just, you know, this was shows that the government was scaremongering completely unnecessarily, and they've been doing it for 3 years. This is just a continuation of the scheme. And what I fear might come in is that they will make some kind of legislation or regulation that says if you get an alert on your phone that says do something because we say there's an emergency or a pandemic or whatever, and you don't do it, then that will become some kind of criminal offence. This is where this potentially is going. Well, no,
the
I mean,
idea that
this
the government
is
can organise itself to do anything like that.
Well, it could do. This is what they're trying to bring in. It's not a conspiracy. This is like a...
And running big organisations is difficult. This government particularly has demonstrated it's barely capable of keeping itself on the road. The idea that they will be able to implement some form of grand conspiracy involving moving media and moving police and army and forcing us to do things, is what it says on the tin. It's a means of alerting us if something really bad happens. And sometimes we just, the government isn't lying to us. Sometimes the government is just trying to help us.
You're a trusting man, that's all. That's what I can say is trusting. Where do you sit on that conversation? Do you sit there and say, thank you? A great one, Rishi Sunak. Thank you so much for trying to keep me safe. Or do you think it's a little bit more overreach of the government than necessary? Your thoughts, keep them coming in. I'll have some more of them in a couple of minutes after the break.